What time is it? It's Father Time, the King of Truth. And what I want to present to you this evening is the race history of the Creole people of Virginia and North Carolina, the Atlantic Creoles. This is one of the things that Donald Trump wanted to take from you in our history. And while we still have it, I would like to present it to you. There are a lot of things that's going on that we might have been told. A lot of us have forgotten, and it's still in existence for now. It's something that we should tell our grandchildren, children about. And it's very interesting. I would like you to pay close attention. This here is something that you really should check out. So this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to introduce this to you. So please, take heed and listen. So, here we go.
Quite African, nor quite European, existed before the cotton fields, before the slave laws, and before America ever had a name. They were neither and both. Only a portion of the story was revealed by their skin. The rest was revealed by their family, language, and beliefs. They were Creoles from the Atlantic, and they contributed to the development of modern-day America. However, both black and white historians have misinterpreted their tale, which has been buried, obscured by time, and obliterated by legislation. We convey the truth now, not just about a people, but also about how blackness in America started with strength, ability, and dignity rather than chains. Welcome back to Papa Sear's YouTube channel, everyone. You're in the perfect place if you enjoy learning about fascinating topics including history, Black American spirituality, hoodoo, and much more. In order to be informed anytime I upload a new video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Right now, I'll give you a second to hit like and subscribe. America did not develop the Atlantic Creole. Long before they sailed across the ocean, their identity was formed. European traders and African aristocracy established towns at Elmina Castle, Luanda, Cape Verde, and Sao Tome on the West African coast in the 1400s and 1500s. European males married African women. Luso Africans, their offspring, were multilingual and adept at negotiating cultural differences, trade, and diplomacy. They developed pidgins, which would eventually become Creoles, as their own languages.
Yeah, Pidgin was an African language that they brought here to the United States. A lot of things like we need to follow up on and listen to. There's a lot of truth out here. A lot of truth that we're not privileged to. So, we just got to sit back, try to understand what's going on, because they're taking the books off the shelves and we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. This here is no joke. Believe me. No joke. They want everything. So, let's get to it.
They possessed both soft and hard skills, blacksmithing, getting around, farming, interpretation, bargaining, and the strange capacity to switch between two realities that frequently turned them away. They weren't masses of slaves. Some had earned their freedom, while others were born free. This was not an identityless people. When the Atlantic Creoles arrived in the Americas, they brought their identity with them. The Creoles weren't defenseless prisoners when they arrived. They arrived as cultural survivors and accomplished professionals. The first myth is that the Americas are where their cultural identity or heritage originated. Before the transatlantic slave trade or even the act of crossing the ocean, this group of people had already established their own identities. In particular, Portuguese colonists had previously intermarried with African women, and a breed of children and progeny was produced as a result of these intermarriages. The Creoles in Africa were now considered a separate community since they were shunned by both Africans and Europeans. They therefore discovered that it was advantageous to be able to move between the two worlds, learn several trades, become fluent in languages, become skilled negotiators, and become masters of disguise, even being able to pass for African or European when necessary, but then return to their communities and be Creole. The first 20-odd Africans came to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. The majority, if not all, were Atlantic Creole. Virginia was not yet a racially segregated state in the 1600s. Although slavery did exist, it was not yet the system of racial enslavement that would become totalizing in the 1700s. Africans had the ability, and did, to marry, own land, become free, and keep their names. Some even employed white indentured servants or owned slaves. Property was acquired by men such as Anthony Johnson, who was formerly Antonio. Johnson's ancestors grew tobacco and left huge estates. His grandson named their farm Angola, commemorating their African ancestry. The Chesapeake landscape was not yet rigid. There was yet hope for freedom. There was no racial caste system in early Chesapeake, Virginia. Creoles were able to start families and own land. Additionally, one needs to comprehend the slave industry that grew out of Virginia in order to comprehend the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. In particular, Virginia was the birthplace of slavery as an industry. We are discussing the first Atlantic Creole contacts in Virginia in the 1600s. And that was back when the colony was just getting started. Like many subsequent colonies, Jamestown was a failing colony. Thus, in terms of slavery, this racial caste structure had not yet been established. It was more akin to an indentured servitude system, or even one in which you might have been a lifelong slave because of something, legal systems.
All right.
Problem with urination.
Things happen. We gotta get this out the way.
The slaves in Virginia, the Creoles, were trustworthy. At first, there weren't many of them, and they were more of a resource. Therefore, one must also consider the colonizers' point of view. The Creoles, the slaves, and the enslaved population were resources that, to some extent, needed to be placated. However, there were some liberties that were initially granted to this population. This is where the Atlantic Creole culture is relevant. It is important to keep in mind that half of their identity was also Europeanized before they arrived in the Americas. They had Africanized the other half. When they arrived in the Americas, they brought that idealism with them. There is a common aspect of property ownership among many of the Atlantic Creole families that originate from the Virginia and North Carolina area. Thus, when the option to purchase land became available, they took advantage of it. Something they value highly. Something that is extremely important to them, both for their culture and community. To own property is to be Creole, or to be a part of our culture. Atlantic Creoles gained more than simply economic and legal clout. They created cultural authority. They interacted with Native Americans, Europeans, and Africans by speaking Creole languages and Pidgin English. They were triracial, combining Native American, European, and African ancestry. Like the artist family, many married Native Americans or lighter-skinned Black Americans, establishing family lines that have represented freedom for more than 3 centuries. However, they also developed a unique style. Sometimes, wavy hair and lighter complexion were favored, not out of pride, but as a survival tactic. You were less likely to be considered enslaved if you looked lighter. They developed their own spiritual rituals when laws changed, fusing Christianity, Catholicism, African religion, and the newly growing Protestantism. Because they were frequently shunned by both white European society and recently arriving Africans, they stood apart from both groups. They were the others, neither Europeans nor Africans fully embraced. They thus created their own worlds and communities. Colorism as we know it today was not a part of the Creole aesthetic. In a hazardous, racially divided world, it was a survival tactic. Additionally, colorism must be brought up in order to have an accurate conversation regarding the Atlantic Creoles. In order to understand this specific subset of individuals, we must extend grace to our forebears. From a genetic and cultural perspective, the Atlantic Creoles are a subset of Black Americans. America was not the birthplace of this agony of being the others. The others had already arrived in Africa. Both people who were entirely African and persons who were European were viewed with suspicion because those around them did not trust them. This group of people was the subject of many negative stereotypes. They considered them to be peddlers, occasionally robbers, intoxicated, and promiscuous. They were a group of individuals who emerged from society's peripheries. Being the others, learning to form a group, learning to live within their own, and developing their own cultural aesthetic were all things they carried with them. All right. Now, an Atlantic Creole is not defined by skin tone. Native Americans were the first people they married, not Africans. Despite what many people think, there were only 22, I think, Africans who arrived in Jamestown at first, and most, if not all, of them were Atlantic Creole. The majority of the men did marry Native American women after they were released from their indentured servitude and allowed to live freely among the people. A few of them even got married to women from Europe. Thus, we begin to observe what occurs as a trend, that this group of people has a particular aesthetic. They came into the Americas lighter skinned with wavier hair. At first, they were getting married to folks with lighter skin tones and straighter hair. In Virginia, the darker you were, the closer you were to slavery as the state's terrain changed into a system of racial castes. So you have this group of individuals who had their independence, because the majority of the Atlantic Creoles were free, or at some point had acquired their freedom. So the mentality was, if we are having darker children, our offspring could perhaps end up enslaved since our freedom is not assured. These groups, these Atlantic Creole families, had a system where they married one another to not only perpetuate the bloodline, but to also keep the community together. Before the late 1600s, freedom was possible. The Creoles possessed land, sued in courts, registered marriages and baptisms in the Anglican Church. Some even held white indentured servants. They lived as equals, or near equals, with poor Europeans. But as money expanded and racial inequalities tightened, planters saw the Creole independence as a threat. The Virginia slave codes of 1705 and similar legislation across the colonies stripped away Creole freedoms.
Senators had a lot of things.
Became a lasting hallmark of captivity. This was the turning point. The system of racial castes became established. All people of color were denied the right to freedom. At this pivotal moment, we begin to observe a far more substantial change in the situation. Many Atlantic Creoles are seen to migrate to different regions of the Americas. Many of them hide in the swamps, move into North Carolina, or simply abandon Virginia. There are also some families that argue. They battle in court. They go to court to defend their lands and to sue the government for specific issues using their linguistic and negotiating abilities. Furthermore, there are records showing that a large number of them were successful in court and were able to keep their possessions or land. A lot of Creoles ran away when they faced legal extinction. A few vanished into the wetlands. Others formed triracial groups, such as the Lumbee, by joining native tribes. Some moved north to New Jersey and Delaware. For more than 300 years, certain families, like the artist family, resisted and maintained their independence. Others entered white society by adopting European characteristics and light complexion as a means of obtaining new, albeit complex, identities. However, they adjusted in every situation. They made it out alive. Creoles did what everyone who is marginalized does. They managed to live. And being invisible is part of it sometimes. As a result, we witness people passing for white. We witness people going to any lengths to preserve their lives or sense of self. Few people today can recall the Atlantic Creoles, and they are frequently misinterpreted by those who do. It has been alleged that they believed they were superior than later African Americans. The reality, however, is more nuanced. The Creoles did not fight to deny others their freedom, they fought to protect it. It wasn't vanity that they preferred property ownership, European names, and lighter complexion. It was opposition. By surviving, they laid the foundation for future black communities throughout the South. Additionally, their legacy endures. Within family names and enclaves of three races additionally, the notion of black identity as adaptable, strong, and respectable it's common to confuse Atlantic Creole tenacity with snobbery. However, it was about surviving and safeguarding the family's history from both extremes. The Europeans believed that this group of people believed they were arrogant or superior to what they perceived them to be based on the communities in which they lived. However, when we show grace to this minority, show love to our ancestors, and put ourselves in their position, we discover that this was a survival strategy. It was primarily about legacy preservation. And
You know, this is history we got to teach our people. There's a lot of history there that we don't know about. And like I said, it'll never be taught in schools. Never. Because that's the way it is. Because nobody don't want you to know about our history. And it's a doggone shame. Virginia to North Carolina, the Creoles. When we think about that, we think about Louisiana. But this here is way before Louisiana. Way before Louisiana. And it's amazing. That's history. History that we don't know anything about. And I'm trying to bring it to you to present some things that we need to know. So, here it is. Father Time, the King of Truth. Please subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up because there is more of this coming to you. So, I'm getting ready to close this down. And
ensuring that their children had another day to live.
Here we go.
Whether that meant going into the swamps or into the shadows, or being true to who they were, not just as Africans, but also as partially European and partially Native American. This community was triracial. Therefore, I believe that we can learn from the Atlantic Creoles to cherish and hold on to aspects of our individuality. To ensure that our generations are aware of who we are, we must discuss and preserve our history and culture, whether through written or spoken means. Between worlds, they stood. They erected bridges between languages, religions, and continents. In the shadow of empires, they were born. They also carved out independence in the crevices of such empires. The Atlantic Creoles persist despite historical attempts to eradicate them, not as remnants of a vanished era, but as pioneers of Black America. We now claim our legacy and remember them.
This year.